So in this first section of the groundwork, what Kant is trying to do is take us from our shared intuitions about morality into a more philosophical realm. And philosophy, I should point out for Kant here, really just means a clarification of common sense. You and I, we already have these moral concepts inside of us. Again, Kant is not trying to teach you anything about morality here. What we need to do, though, is pay more attention to the ideas we already have about morality. We need to make them explicit. We need to clarify them. So we need to take these intuitions and just put them more carefully. And so that's the goal over the course of this first section. Coming out of that first sentence, the way we're going to do that is by clarifying the idea of goodwill, this intuition that you and I already have, that what you do isn't morally as important as why you're doing it. There seem to be good reasons to do bad things and bad reasons to do good things. And so Kant says we've got to take a look at this idea of goodwill and figure out what it means to have goodwill. Now, in paragraph 8, Kant says we then have to develop this idea of a will which should be esteemed on its own. Again, not goodwill because it accomplishes good things, but a will that is good all by itself. If that will was not able to accomplish its purpose, it itself could still be good in itself. So in order to do that, Kant says, we're going to take a look at this notion of duty. In duty, Kant says, we can clarify, we can show more clearly and easily this idea of goodwill that we already have. The idea is that duty contains the notion of goodwill, but with what Kant calls certain subjective hindrances and restrictions. In other words, we're going to take something that subjectively, from your point of view, is a more restricted form of goodwill. But Kant says that restriction, that focus, isn't going to hide goodwill. It's actually going to bring it out more clearly. So let's just think about what Kant here means by duty. So why duty? Well, first of all, what is duty? What does it mean to talk about duties? So when we're talking about duties, we're talking about obligations of some sort, right? So notice we are not all that far from normativity. Now, when we talk about duties, what are we talking about? We're talking about things that you have to do, not voluntary activities. You don't call something a duty if it's just something you've decided to do. Instead, to talk about duties or obligations, there's some sense that even if you don't want to do it, you have to do it. And so to really start to get at what Kant is talking about here, I actually want to look at the intersection of these two questions. The question of what it is you have to do, and the question of what you want to do. And so notice that there can be cases where you want to do the things you have to do, and where you don't want to do the things you have to do. Likewise, notice that there can be cases where you don't want to do the things that you're not supposed to do, and where you want to do the things that you're not supposed to do. Now, of course, Kant's going to go on in the very next paragraph to say he's not even going to think about the things that you're not supposed to do, actions contrary to duty. If you're not supposed to do it, then it's obvious that you're not doing it for the right reasons, right? So instead, we're just going to look at these two cases where you do what you're supposed to do, where you do your duty, where you fulfill your obligations. Now, what is the subjective hindrance or restriction Kant is talking about? Well, when we're talking about duty, we're actually going to rule out or set aside cases where you also want to do what you're supposed to do. And so I want you to think about some various cases where you've got an obligation. Say, if you and your roommates have divided up duties around the house. Maybe there's a rotating schedule of chores. So one week you clean the bathroom, another week you take out the garbage and wash the dishes, etc., etc. So let's imagine that you just love scrubbing the bathroom. It's something you do as a stress reliever. If you've had a bad day, you just go and scrub some grout and it makes you feel better. And so on the week where it's your turn to clean the bathroom, do you clean the bathroom? Of course you clean the bathroom. Man, what a good week, right? I would do this even if I didn't have to, you'll say. And it gets done. And at the end of the week, why did you do it? And certainly you can say, I did it because it was my obligation, right? It was my chore around the house this week. But by the same token, notice you can also say, well, I did it because I wanted to do it. And if I want to do something, I'll do it. And if I have to do something, then I'll do it. Now compare that to a situation where you hate cleaning the bathroom. You absolutely hate cleaning showers or washing the sink or cleaning off the mirror. There is nothing that you wouldn't rather do than clean the bathroom. And so when your week comes up, of course, you might try to trade with a roommate. Hey, I'll wash the dishes. If you, no, okay. You might try to weasel out of it. But let's say, even though you absolutely hate cleaning the bathroom, you still do it. At the end of the week, we look and, oh, the bathroom looks spotless. You did a hell of a job. Why did you clean the bathroom? Well, it's certainly not because you wanted to. In this case, you can say, well, I cleaned the bathroom because it was my obligation to clean the bathroom. That is going to be what Kant will call not just acting with duty or doing your duties, fulfilling your obligations, but acting from duty. To act from duty is to make duty the reason you do something. I didn't just do my job, I did my job because it was my job. And so, does this mean that you have to hate doing the right thing in order to be a good person? Absolutely not. Again, this is just a subjective hindrance or restriction on the idea of goodwill, but it's on there to help us see the idea of goodwill more clearly. And so as we're talking about morality, and this point is going to be really, really important as we go on, I just want you to notice something. When we're talking about what's morally good, when we're talking about doing what's right, ideally, there are lots of times in your life where what you have to do, what you ought to do, is also what you want to do. Where doing the right thing and doing what you want to do are just taking the exact same actions and steps. And that's great, right? Win-win. But, and this is important, sooner or later, there comes a day where those two paths diverge, where doing what you want to do and doing what you ought to do are different things. Worse yet, there are times where the thing that you really, 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 really want to do is the thing you shouldn't. Or where the thing that you must do, the right thing to do, the thing you ought to do, is the one thing that you really, really, really don't want to do. Now we're going to focus on duty here because at the end of the day, when you want to do the right thing, you do it, everybody wins, everybody's happy. But when those two part company, when the thing that you want to do and the thing that you ought to do become two very different things, that is the situation where the good person does the right thing even when they really, really don't want to. And the person who keeps doing what they want to do even when they shouldn't, that's a bad person. So when we're judging morally, when we're thinking about moral judgments, those are really going to be the test cases. And as the test cases, that is going to be what helps us see the idea of goodwill the most clearly. And that is why Kant says we're going to focus here on duty. And in fact, this first section of the groundwork is going to give us a tight philosophical concept of duty in order to help us really start asking the right questions and thinking carefully about goodwill as we move into section 2. That's going to be how we transition to philosophical knowledge. So we're still trying to figure out what it is that makes the goodwill good. What does it mean to say the goodwill is good in itself? And to get there, we're going to think about duty, Kant says. And so now, over the next couple of paragraphs, Kant is just going to talk about the things that he's not looking at, right? So all of the cases where doing the right thing and doing what you want to do are the same thing. You're helping yourself, you're pursuing happiness, you're not cheating your customers, etc., etc., etc. All of these cases where self-interest line up with moral rightness. It's not what we're going to look at. So after you move through these various examples, you get to paragraph 14, and paragraph 14 begins. The second proposition is, colon. Now, if you're anything like me, right there, you start to panic. You think, wait a second, second proposition? When was there a first proposition? And this, of course, is the very frustrating thing about Kant. Kant has a full, worked out argument, very careful, all the steps, and yet he's not going to give it all to you. Kant really wants you to be an active reader. And this is, there might be pedagogical value to it, but it's also really frustrating. What you have to be doing with Kant is step by step, really playing along and keeping up, because he's just going to drop pieces out to make you go pick them up. If you're reading a book like I am, though, translated by James Ellington, the translator's going to be a nice guy and have your back. In my translation, at least, the second proposition is, footnote. And when I go down to that footnote, it's in brackets because it's supplied by Ellington. Kant did not write this footnote, but Ellington, of course, fills you in here. He says that the first proposition of morality says that an action must be done from duty in order to have any moral worth. So this is really what we've already been saying, right? Actions have to be done from duty, not just with duty, in order to have moral worth. Meaning, it's not just what you do, it's why you did it. If you did it because you wanted to do it, again, we're not saying that makes you a bad person. We're just saying that does not have any inherent moral worth to it. Because I wanted to do it does not make my action good. I can use that justification to do anything, and notice that does not make me a good person. Likewise, I did it to help you out does not automatically make me a good person. I did it to make someone smile does not automatically make someone a good person. I did it because it's the right thing to do. That is what gives an action moral worth. So, in other words, what we've already said is that when we're judging the moral worth of what you do, we're not actually judging the action. We're judging the reason you did it. So this is a step backwards, right? Or a step back into your process. I'm not just thinking about what you did, I'm thinking about why you did it. And the moral worth of that action comes from doing it because it's the right thing to do. So now we're ready for that second proposition. The second proposition, Kant says, is that an action done from duty derives its moral worth, not from the purpose which is to be attained by it, but from the maxim by which it is determined. So, two things here, right? First, again, not the purpose that is to be achieved by it. What makes my reason for doing something good is not what I'm expecting to have happen. Well, I'm trying to make the world a better place. I'm trying to make people happy. I'm trying to make you smile. I'm trying to cause you pleasure, etc., etc. It's not what follows from the action. Rather, Kant says, when I'm judging your reasons for doing something, what I'm judging is the maxim by which it's determined. Now, what is a maxim? Kant himself will tell you a maxim is a subjective principle of volition. Now remember, volition, that's just willing, right? The power to will, the ability to will. Okay, subjective principle? Well, a principle is a rule. Subjective, well, we've been establishing, right? Subjective, for you, for yourself. So, maxim, we might put it this way. A subjective principle of volition is a rule that you set for yourself to determine your action. Now, I've got to pause here in order to point something out to you. We've been dealing with the reasons why you do things and how you make decisions, and of course, just the fact that we make decisions at all is why, as human beings, we are moral creatures, right? We don't just act, we don't just automatically do things the way a plant does. We aren't just driven by our strongest desires the way the lower animals are. We make decisions. But Kant is going to point out an important clarification to that, and that is, when you make decisions, you're not just arbitrarily deciding on a course of action. We make decisions in what I might call law-like ways. Now, here's what I mean by that. When you're making a decision, what you're doing is you are thinking about various rules, various general ideas that apply to the situation, and from there, deriving the correct course of action. Let me give you an example. You are sitting in class and you find that you are thirsty. What do? Now notice here, you're not just going to make some arbitrary decision. The way you're going to decide is you're going to think about a couple of things, right? First of all, what kind of a class is it? What's going on in class right now, right? If this is just some sort of a break, or if it's a test and you finished early, or if it's a long lecture and you can slip out for a minute and come back, then you might think to yourself, this is an appropriate time to actually get up and go get a drink. However, if something else is going on, right? It is oral presentations and you're right in the middle of yours. Or you're right in the middle of a timed test and you haven't finished it yet. Or this is a small seminar discussion and you're right in the middle of a thought or a conversation, right? In any of these cases, you might think to yourself, this is not an appropriate time to get up and get a drink. Likewise, you might look at what you have with you, right? If you brought some water with you, perfect, have some of that. If you didn't though, now of course you have to think about your other options. What about if your neighbor has a bottle of water sitting on their desk? Do you just reach right over? The water's right there, you wouldn't have to leave class. Well, no, of course not. Well, why don't you? Well, because you don't take other people's stuff, right? It would be weird to take your neighbor's water. Now notice, all of these ideas though are general ideas. They're not just about this specific circumstance today. It's always weird to steal your neighbor's water bottle. The circumstances that would make it appropriate to get up and excuse yourself from class right now would also make it appropriate to get up and excuse yourself from other classes on other days. The reasons that it might be inappropriate or bad to get up and try to excuse yourself right now would also hold in other classes on other days. And so what you're going to do is you're going to think about various rules, general rules that you have for action. You're going to think about which ones apply, and then you are going to determine a specific course of action. I don't have water with me. I can't take my neighbor's. I am very thirsty. I do need to go. We're nowhere near the end of class. However, the professor's talking about something right now. It's a big lecture. I could probably slip out for a minute and get back. I think it's an okay time to go. I'll go. So what Kant is pointing out then is that when you make decisions, you are making that decision by applying general rules to your specific circumstances. And so when Kant says here that the moral worth of an action comes from the maxim by which it's determined, what he's saying is, when we're judging the morality of an action, again, we're not judging what happens because of the action, we're judging why you did it. And when I judge why you did it, when I'm looking at your reasons for doing it, I'm not just looking at the decision, I'm looking at the general rules you've given yourself to guide your action. You can give yourself lots of different rules to govern your action. Some of those rules are good rules, and some of those rules will be bad rules. Always look out for me, make other people suffer. All of these will be bad rules for action, right? So the idea here is that when we're judging the morality of what you do, when we're judging your morality, your goodwill, what we're looking at is not just the specific decision you make, but the rules governing. And so another way we can start to ask this question is, what's the rule that a good person gives themselves for acting? What is the rule that governs the goodwill? So what happened to duty? I thought that was the whole focus of this first section. Well, okay, we're getting back there. In fact, in the very next paragraph. The very next paragraph, Kant is going to give you the third proposition. But as Kant himself will point out, this third proposition is going to be what happens when you combine the first two propositions. And so here's just a little secret to let you in on with Kant. Kant always works in threes. And furthermore, not only does Kant give you things in threes, the third thing is always going to be what happens when you combine the first two. So 1 plus 2 is 3 for Kant. We put the two together and we derive this third proposition. Now, the third proposition in this first section is Kant's nice philosophical definition of duty. Duty, he says, is the necessity of acting out of respect for the law. And so, again, let's show how this is putting those first two propositions together. That first proposition says that you have to act from duty in order for your action to have any moral worth, right? So, acting from duty is the necessity of acting. What it means to have a duty is that you have to do it even if you don't want to. And again, we've been focusing on cases where you don't want to show the reason. That second proposition, of course, when I'm judging your reasons, I'm judging the rule you've given yourself. Out of respect for the law, Kant says. Well, when we're judging moral duties, we're judging, have you acted out of respect for the moral law? But this last important concept is respect. Kant says duty is the necessity of acting out of respect for the law. So what does it mean to act out of respect for the law? Now, Kant, of course, even himself gives you a footnote down here that will say, listen, you're going to object that I'm taking refuge behind this weird, fuzzy concept of respect instead of giving it a nice rational solution. But here's the thing, Kant says, respect is a rational concept, and in fact, one that he distinguishes from fear and inclination. And so here's the really important part. Let's think about what it means to respect something or to act out of respect. Now, I want you to think about various reasons you might have for, say, doing something your mother asks you to do. Your mother says, hey, would you please take out the garbage? And you then might take out the garbage. Why? Well, there are various reasons why, right? Maybe you have a favor to ask mom later. You want to borrow her car, and if you do what mom asks you to do, she'll be in a good mood, and then you can say, hey, by the way, can I borrow your car tomorrow? I have to run an errand, and she'll say, well, of course, right? Such a helpful child. Of course you can borrow my car. Now, that's out of inclination, right? Hope for reward, let's say. You're doing something nice for mom, and then in exchange, you're hoping she'll do something nice for you. And this is a reason you might always do the right thing, right? You do the right thing so that other people will like you. You do the right thing in hope that someone will reward you for it. Likewise, maybe your mom isn't going to grant you any favors, but maybe If mom asks you to take out the garbage and you say no, she's gonna get angry. And all hell breaks loose, right? And you would not like mom when she's angry. You are afraid of being punished. There again, right, is a reason to do something that you're supposed to do. If you don't do it, you might get punished. If you don't do it, people might not like you. If you do the wrong thing, you might get arrested for it, right? Fear is a reason to do something. Neither of those makes you a good person, right? If you are doing the right thing because you're hoping people will reward you for doing it, you're doing it out of self-interest, right? Likewise, if you're simply doing the right thing to avoid getting punished for doing the wrong thing, you're doing it out of self-interest. And so what it means to act out of duty is to act neither out of fear or inclination. Well, what's left? This idea of acting out of respect simply means mom asks you to take out the garbage and you take out the garbage. Why did you do it? Because she's your mother and she asked you to, right? That is what it means to respect your mother. Likewise, if you are supposed to do something and you do it, and why did you do it? Because it's the right thing? You are simply doing it because you respect the difference between right and wrong. And so what it means, this subjective restriction or hindrance that we put on goodwill, this idea of duty has really helped us see not just what it means to do the right thing, but what it means to do the right thing for the right reason, for the morally virtuous reason. And the right reason to do something is simply because you respect the difference between right and wrong, and you do the right thing simply because it's the right thing to do. Now, if we're asking our questions correctly, and again, that's been the focus of this first section, to help us think more clearly and carefully about our moral judgments, then at this point, the question might go something like this. Okay, if what it means to have goodwill is to do whatever the moral law tells me to do, simply because the moral law tells me to do it, it all comes down to, what does the moral law tell me to do? After all, I respect the difference between right and wrong. I want to do the right thing because it's the right thing, so tell me what the right thing to do is. If you're asking yourself, what does the moral law say? You're now asking the right question. And in fact, this will be the thing that we want to go on and really dig into in the second section. When Kant says he's looking for the supreme principle of morality, that's what we're looking for. What is that difference between right and wrong? What does the moral law tell us to do? And so, here's where, just from what we've already said, we can start to see a little puzzle emerging. Remember that what makes the right thing to do is not what results from it, right? It's not about the consequences of your actions. It's not even about the intended consequences of your actions. In order for the goodwill to be good in itself, it has to give itself the right rule. So in that case, as Kant himself will go on to ask in paragraph 17, what sort of a law can it be that's going to determine what you should do without any reference to what's supposed to happen or the intended consequences? And we're really going to work out that idea in the second section, but you already get a little bit of a preview of it here. Kant says, well, at this point, I've deprived the will of every other impulse that could arise from inclination. And so all that remains is the universal conformity to law as such. In other words, the moral law can't tell you to do what's best for you. The moral law can't tell you to do what's going to bring about the best circumstances or the best results. All the moral law can tell you to do is to do what everyone ought to do. And in fact, as we'll see in that second section, the universality of morality is its content. At this point, if we've done our job well, we've taken our shared intuitions and we've made them explicit. And we've been able to start to think more carefully about them so that we can start to ask careful questions and think clearly. thinking clearly about these intuitions is going to help us really formulate them tightly, and that, of course, will help us make the really hard decisions.